Marx and Satan, Chapter 5. A Cruel Counterfeit. Bukharin, Stalin, Mao, Ceausescu, Andropov. It might be instructive at this point to take a look at some modern Marxists. Bukharin, General Secretary of the Communist International and one of the chief Marxist doctrinaires in this century, as early as the age of 12, after reading the book of Revelation in the Bible, longed to become the Antichrist. Realizing from Scripture that the Antichrist had to be the son of the apocalyptic great whore, he insisted that his mother confess to having been a harlot. About Stalin he wrote, "He is not a man but a devil." Too late, Bukharin realized into whose hands he had fallen. In a letter which he made his wife memorize just before his arrest and execution, he said, quote, "I am leaving life. I am lowering my head. I feel my helplessness before a hellish machine." End quote. He had helped erect a guillotine, the Soviet state, that had killed millions, only to learn in the end that its design had been made in hell. He had desired to be the Antichrist. He became instead a victim of the enemy. Similarly, Kaganovich, Stalin's brother-in-law and closest collaborator, writes about him in his diary, soon to be published. Quote, "I started to understand how Stalin managed to make himself a god. He did not have a single human characteristic. Even when he exhibited some emotions, they all did not seem to belong to him. They were as false as the scale on top of armor. And behind this scale was Stalin himself, a piece of steel. For some reason, I was convinced that he would live forever. He was not human at all. Rosa, his wife, says he makes her climb a tree wearing nothing but stockings. I have a feeling he is not human at all. He is too unusual to be a regular human being, although he looks like an ordinary man. Such a puzzle. What is it I'm writing? Am I raving mad too?" End quote. Stalin described to Kaganovich his spiritual exercise. Believers of various religions engage in the practice of meditation on what is beautiful, wise, and good to help them become more loving. Stalin indulged in just the opposite practice. He told Kaganovich, quote, "When I have to say goodbye to someone, I picture this person on all fours and he becomes disgusting. Sometimes I feel attached to a person who should be removed for the good of the cause. What do you think I do? I imagine this person shitting, exhaling stench, farting, vomiting, and I don't feel sorry for this person. The sooner he stops stinking on this earth, the better, and I cross this person out of my heart." End quote. One of Stalin's amusements was to put green glasses on the eyes of horses to make them see hay as grass. Even worse, he put dark glasses of atheism on the eyes of men to keep them from seeing God's green pastures, reserved for believing souls. The diary contains many revealing insights. Quote, "Many times Stalin spoke of religion as our most vicious enemy. He hates religion for many reasons, and I share his feelings. Religion is a cunning and dangerous enemy. Stalin also thinks that separation from children should be the main punishment for all parents belonging to sects, irrespective of whether they were convicted or not. I think he secretly engaged in astrology. One particular feature of his always astonished me. He always talked with some veiled respect about God and religion. At first I thought I was imagining it, but gradually I realized it was true, but he was always careful when the subject came up, and I was never able to find out exactly what his point of view was. One thing that became very clear to me, his treatment of God and religion was very special. For example, he never said directly there was no God. People ceased somehow to be their own selves in his presence. They all admired him and worshipped him. I don't think he enjoyed any great love of the nation. He was above it. It may sound strange, but he occupied a position previously reserved only for God." End quote. Part and parcel of the tragedy of human existence is the fact that one has enemies and is sometimes obliged to fight them. Marx took delight in this sad necessity. His favourite saying, which he often repeated, was, "There is nothing more beautiful in the world than to bite one's enemies." No wonder his follower Stalin said that the greatest joy is to cultivate a person's friendship until he lays his head confidently in your bosom than to implant a dagger in his back, a pleasure not to be surpassed. Marx had expressed the same idea before. He wrote to Engels about comrades with whom he disagreed, quote, "We must make these rogues believe that we continue our relationship with them until we have the power to sweep them away from our road in one manner or another." End quote. It is significant that many of Stalin's comrades in arms spoke about him as demonic. Milovan Djilas, prominent communist leader of Yugoslavia, who was personally well acquainted with Stalin, wrote, quote, "Was it not so that the demonic power and energy of Stalin consisted in this, that he made the communist movement and every person in it pass to a state of confusion and stupefaction, thus creating and ensuring his reign of fear?" End quote. He also says about the whole ruling class of the USSR, quote, "They make a semblance of believing in the ideal of socialism, in a future society without classes. In reality, they believe in nothing except organized power." End quote. Even Stalin's daughter, Svetlana Alyuleva, who never learned about the depths of Satanism, wrote, quote, "Beria," the Soviet Minister of Interior Affairs, "seems to have a diabolic link with all our family. Beria was a frightening, wicked demon. A terrible demon had taken possession of my father's soul." End quote. Svetlana further mentions that Stalin considered goodness and forgiving love to be worse than the greatest crime. Such is the satanic priesthood that rules almost half of mankind and which orders terrorist acts all over the world. Stalin was the illegitimate child of a landlord by a servant maid. His father, fearing notoriety, bribed a cobbler to marry the pregnant girl, but the affair became known. During his childhood, Stalin was mocked as a bastard. During Stalin's teen years, his real father was found murdered. Stalin was suspected, but no proof could be found against him. Later, as a seminary student, he joined communist circles. There, he fell in love with a girl named Galina. Since the communists were poor, Galina was given the assignment to become the mistress of a rich man, and so provide the party with money. When Stalin himself voted for this proposal, she cut her veins. Stalin himself committed robberies for the party, and in this he was very successful. He appropriated none of the stolen money for himself. He was also assigned the duty of infiltrating the Tsarist police. He had to play a dual role, denouncing secondary party members in order to find out police secrets and protect more important communists. As a young man, therefore, Stalin had the worst possible heredity, education, and development. Thus he was easily susceptible to Satanist influence. He became what his name, Stalin, means, a man of steel, without the slightest human emotion or pity. Andropov, late Premier of the Soviets, produced the same impression as Stalin. The French Minister of External Affairs, Claude Cheysson, met him, described Andropov in Le Monde as a man without warmth of soul, who works like a computer. He shows no emotions. He is extremely dispassionate. He is accurate in words and gestures, like a computer. Stalin, like Marx, Engels, and Bauer before him, started out as a believer. At 15, he wrote his first poem, which begins with the words, "Great is the Almighty's providence." He became a seminarian because he felt it was his calling. There he became first a Darwinist, then a Marxist. When he began to write as a revolutionary, the first pseudonyms he used were Demonishvili, meaning something like the demoniac in the Georgian language, and Besoshvili, the devilish. Other evidences of Satanist persuasion amongst Marxist leaders are also significant. Troitskaya, daughter of the Soviet Marshal Tukhachevsky, one of the top men of the Red Army who was later shot by Stalin, wrote of her father that he had a picture of Satan in the east corner of his bedroom, where the Orthodox usually put their icons. When a certain communist in Czechoslovakia was named head of the State Council for Religious Affairs, an institution whose purpose is to spy on believers and persecute them, he took the name Hruza, which means in Slovak horror, an appellation used for devil. One of the leaders of a terrorist organization in Argentina took upon himself the nickname Satanovsky. Anatole France, a renowned French communist writer, introduced some of the greatest intellectuals of France to communism. At a recent exhibition of demonic art in Paris, One of the pieces shown was the specific chair used by that communist writer for presiding over Satanist rituals. Its horned armrests and legs were covered with goat's fur. Britain's centre of Satanism is Highgate Cemetery in London, where Karl Marx is buried. Mysterious rites of black magic are celebrated at this tomb. It was the place of inspiration for the Highgate vampire who attacked several girls in 1970. Hua Kuofeng, director of Red China, also paid it his respects. Ulrich Meinhof, Eselin, and other German Red terrorists have been involved in the occult. One of the oldest devil-worshipping sects, the Syrian Yazidi, was written up in a Soviet atheistic magazine, Nauka I Religia, July 1979. It is the only religious sect about which the magazine wrote not one word of criticism. Furthermore, Mao Zedong wrote, "From the age of 8, I hated Confucius. In our village there was a Confucianist temple. With all my heart, I wished only one thing, to destroy it to its very foundations." End quote. Is it normal for an 8-year-old child to wish only the destruction of his own religion? Such thoughts belong to demonic characters. At the other extreme is St. Paul of the Cross, who from the age of 8 spent 3 hours in prayer every night. Cult of violence. Engels wrote in Anti-Duhring, "Universal love for men is an absurdity." And in a letter to a friend he said, "We need hate rather than love, at least for now." Che Guevara learned his Marxist lessons well. In his writings he echoes Engels' sentiments. Quote, "Hate is an element of fight, pitiless hate against the foe, hate that lifts the revolutionist above the natural limitation of man and makes him become an efficient, destructive, cool, calculating, and cold-killing machine." End quote. This is what the devil wishes to make of men. He has succeeded all too well with many notorious leaders of the human race. In our lifetime we have witnessed more than our share: Hitler, Eichmann, Mengele, Stalin, Mao, Andropov, Pol Pot. Marx writes in the Communist Manifesto, quote, "The communists despise making a secret of their opinions and intentions. They openly declare that their aims can be reached only through the violent overthrow of the whole existing social structure." End quote. Further, quote, "There is only one method to shorten the murderous pains of death of the old society, the bloody birth pangs of the new society. Only one method to simplify and concentrate them. That is revolutionary terrorism." End quote. There have been many revolutions in history. Each had an objective. The American Revolution, for example, was fought for national independence, the French Revolution for democracy. Marx is the only one who formulates as his aim a permanent revolution, terrorism and bloodshed for revolution's sake. There is no purpose to be attained. Violence to the point of paroxysm is its only objective. This is what distinguishes Satanism from ordinary human sinfulness. Marx called terrorists executed for murder in Tsarist Russia immortal martyrs or amazingly capable fellows. Engels wrote too of the bloody revenge we take. This expression occurs often. In the interior of Russia, what a splendid development, the attempts at murder become frequent. Or, leaving aside the problem of morality, for a revolutionist, any means are right which lead to the purpose, the violent as the seemingly tame. The Marxist Lenin, while living under the democratic rule of Kerensky in Russia, said, quote, "What is needed is wild energy, and again energy. I wonder, yea more, I am horrified that more than half a year has passed in speaking about bombs, and not one single bomb has been fabricated." End quote. A further insight into the fundamental attitudes of communists can be gained from a few brief quotes. Quote, Marx, "We make war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of country, of patriotism. The idea of God is the keynote of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed." Quote the Communist Manifesto. "The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their aims can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. let the ruling class tremble at a communist revolution. Quote Lenin, "We have to use any ruse, dodge, trick, cunning, unlawful method, concealment, and veiling of the truth. The basic rule is to exploit the conflicting interests of capitalist states." Quote Lenin again, "Atheism is an integral part of Marxism. Marxism is materialism. We must combat religion. This is the ABC of all materialism and consequently of Marxism." And Lenin in an address in 1922, "First we shall take Eastern Europe, then the masses of Asia. After that we shall surround and undermine the USA, which will fall into our hands without a struggle, like an overripe fruit." And, quote Khrushchev, "If anyone believes our smiles involve abandonment of the teachings of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, he deceives himself. Those who wait for that must wait until a shrimp learns to whistle." End quote. Satanist cruelty. Solzhenitsyn reveals in his monumental Gulag Archipelago that the hobby of Yagoda, the Soviet Union's Minister of Interior Affairs, was to undress and, naked, shoot at images of Jesus and the saints. A couple of comrades joined in with this, another Satanist ritual practiced in communist high places. Why should men allegedly representing the proletariat shoot at the image of Jesus, a proletarian, or the Virgin Mary, a poor woman? Some Pentecostal Christians recall an incident that took place in Russia during World War II. One of their preachers had exorcised a devil who threatened, upon leaving the possessed, "I will take revenge." Several years later, the Pentecostal preacher who had performed the exorcism was shot for his faith. The officer who executed him said just before pulling the trigger, "Now we are even." Are communist officers sometimes possessed by devils? Do they perhaps serve as Satan's instruments of revenge against Christians who seek to overthrow his throne? There is no doubt. In Russia in Stalin's day, some communists killed a number of innocents in the cellars of the police. After the bloody deed, one of the henchmen had second thoughts and went from corpse to corpse apologizing. "I did not intend to do this. I don't know you. Speak to me. Move. Forgive me." One of his comrades then killed him. A third was converted and later related the incident. Russkaya Misl, a Russian-language magazine in France, reported, on March 13, 1975, the following from the Soviet Union. D. Porfirovich, in Russia, had a daughter and a son whom he brought up in the faith. Naturally, they had to attend communist schools. At the age of 12, the daughter came home and told her parents, "Religion is a capitalist superstition. We are living in new times." She dropped Christianity altogether. Afterwards, she joined the Communist Party and became a member of the secret police. This was a terrible blow to her parents. Later, the mother was arrested. Under communist rule, no one possesses anything, whether it be children, a wife, or personal liberty. The state can take them away at any time. After the mother's arrest, the son exhibited great sorrow. A year later, he hanged himself. D. Porfirovich found this suicide letter. Quote, "Father, will you judge me? I'm a member of the Communist Youth Organization. I had to sign that I would report everything to the Soviet authorities. One day, the police called me, and Varia, my sister, asked me to sign a denunciation against Mother because, as a Christian, she is considered a counter-revolutionist. I signed. I am guilty of her imprisonment. Now they have ordered me to spy on you. The consequence will be the same. Forgive me, Father. I have decided to die." End quote. The suicide of the son was followed by the jailing of the father. Priest Zinovy Kovalyk was arrested by the Bolsheviks in the year 1941 and was confined in the Brigidka jail in Lviv, Ukraine. When the Germans put the Bolsheviks to flight that same year, the people of the city found the priest's blood-stained body nailed to the wall by the arms and legs, as if it were the crucified Lord. They also found about 6,000 massacred prisoners shot in the nape of the neck, whom the Bolsheviks had piled on top of each other in the cellars and covered over with plaster. Dr. Sass Yavorsky of the United States, after the capture of Lviv by the Germans near the end of June 1941, went searching for his imprisoned father and saw in the jail a priest nailed to a cross. Into his slashed stomach, the communists had placed the body of an unborn baby, taken from the womb of its mother, whose corpse lay on the blood-soaked floor. Other eyewitnesses recognized that this was the body of the renowned missionary, Father Kovalyk. Generally, to the communists, human life is cheap. Lenin wrote during the Civil War, quote, "It would be a shame not to shoot men for not obeying the draft and avoiding mobilization. Report more often about the results." End quote. During the Spanish Civil War, communists killed 4,000 Catholic priests. A renowned Russian Orthodox priest named Dudko reported that 6 communists entered the house of Father Nicholas Charjov, pulled out his hair, gouged out his eyes, made many cuts on his body, passed a pressing iron over it, then shot him with 2 bullets. This happened on the eve of St. Nicholas. It was not only a crime against the priest, but also a mockery of the saint. The Western press reported on March 10, 1983, that in Zimbabwe, 3,000 of the Ndebele tribe were killed by the soldiers of the communist dictator Mugabe. The army had been trained by North Korean instructors. Tribe members were asked to shoot their grown-up sons themselves. If they refused, they were shot along with their sons. The devil apes God by promising still waters and green pastures which are not his to give. Therefore he must pretend, and the less he can offer, the more he must pretend. To gain a foothold, he puts on a false front. Did you ever wonder about communist front organizations? And makes benevolent gestures. But he delivers only misery, death, and destruction. Awful, complete, universal, and pitiless. The devil is jealous and becomes enraged at spiritual beauty. It offends him. Since he cannot be beautiful, he lost his primal beauty because of his pride, he does not want anyone else to be. If it were not for the saint's spiritual beauty, the devil would not seem so ugly. Therefore he wishes to deface all beauty. This is why Christians in the Romanian communist prison of Pitești, as well as other communist jails, were tortured, not only to betray the secrets of the underground church, but to blaspheme. Regimes under which such horrors occur again and again, regimes that turn even Christians into murderers and denouncers of innocent victims, can only be abhorred by the children of God. Whoever bids them Godspeed is a partaker in their evil deeds. 2 John 11. Satanic sin. I have written that Marxism is satanic, but is not every sin satanic by its very nature? I pondered long about this. Then I had a dream one night that clarified my thinking. In my dream, I saw a prostitute hooking young men who were just leaving church. I asked her, "Why did you choose this particular place to work?" She replied, "My delight is to lead young men into sin just as they come from worship." The Greek word for worship in the New Testament is proskune, which means etymologically to kiss. The worshipper stepping out of the house of prayer still has the imprint of Jesus' kisses on his mouth. What a satisfaction to defile him just then, to make him wallow in the bed of lasciviousness, and to say to him then, "You see, Jesus, to whom you prayed, could not keep you from sin for even 5 minutes. He is not your Saviour. My Master is more powerful than he." Sexual impurity is a common human sin. Mephistopheles asks Faust to seduce Gretchen just as she is walking to church with a prayer book in her hand. This is satanic. To write, read, or view pornography is another common sin, but it is a characteristic of American pornography, which promotes incest, pederasty, and perversion, that it is full of the names of God, Christ, and Mary. With every obscenity there is a sacred word, with every ugly gesture a heavenly expression, to defile and profane the holy. This is satanic. To slay the innocent is a very common sin as well. To crucify Jesus, the Son of God, between 2 thieves in order to suggest guilt by association is satanic. To kill political enemies, to make war and stir up revolution, even with mass killings, proves human sinfulness. But the Russian communists, having killed millions of their enemies, turned their violence against even their friends, including their most illustrious comrades, the chief perpetrators of their revolution. This is the seal of Satanism. It is revolution not for attaining a goal, but revolution and killing for killing's sake, what Marx called the permanent revolution. Of 29 members and candidates in the Central Committee of the Soviet Communists in 1917, the year of the revolution, only 4 had the good fortune to depart this life before being deprived of it. 1 of the 4 was posthumously declared an enemy of the revolution. 13 were sentenced to death by their own comrades or disappeared. 2 were so persecuted by Stalin that they committed suicide. To be a criminal or a mafioso is a heinous human sin, but the Satanic goes beyond even what the mafia allows. Tommaso Buscetta, a representative of the Sicilian mafia, who became a police informer and revealed the crimes of that organization, said, quote, "Crime is a necessity that one cannot avoid, but that always has a reason. With us, gratuitous crime, which is an end in itself or the result of an individual impulse, is excluded. We exclude, for example, transversal vendetta, i.e. the calculated killing of someone near the target of our crime, such as a wife, children, or relatives." End quote. Satanic crime is of another order. Hitler killed millions of Jews, including babies, with the excuse that Jews had done harm to the German people. For the communists, it was a matter of course to imprison and torture the family members of a person they considered guilty. When I was jailed, it was taken for granted that my wife must be jailed too, and that my son must be excluded from all schooling. Marxism is not an ordinary sinful human ideology. It is satanic in its manner of sinning, as it is satanic in the teachings it purveys. Only in certain circumstances has it openly avowed its satanic character. One can judge a teacher by his disciples. The painter Picasso said, "An artist must discover the way to convince his public of the full truth of his lies." Who was the man who wrote this monstrosity? The same who wrote, "I came to communism as one comes to a fountain. My adherence to communism is the logical consequence of my entire life and work." So, one becomes a Marxist because his ideal is a lie. How sad. To gain an insight into the life and thinking of a Satanist, one need only read a few mild excerpts from the writing of Aleister Crowley, 1875 to 1947, notorious for his involvement in occult practices. Quote, "Pity not the fallen, I never knew them, I console not, I hate the consoler and the consoled. The wolf betrays only the greedy and treacherous, the raven betrays only the melancholy and dishonest, but I am he of whom it is written, he shall deceive the very elect. I have feasted myself on the blood of the saint, but I am not suspected of men to be their enemy. For my fleece is white and warm, for my teeth are not the teeth of one that tears flesh, and my eyes are mild, and they know me not as the chief of lying spirits. Beautiful art thou, O Babylon, and desirable. O Babylon, Babylon, thou mighty mother, that ride upon the crowned beasts. Let me be drunken upon the wine of your fornication. Let your kisses wanton me unto death." End quote. Crowley quotes a multitude of sayings like this from completely unknown older Satanist works, unavailable to the uninitiated. Blasphemous versions of the Lord's Prayer. The Soviet newspaper Sovietskaya Molodyoy, February 14, 1976, adds a new and shattering proof of the connections between Marxism and Satanism. It describes how militant communists stormed churches and mocked God under the Tsarist regime. For this purpose, the communists used a blasphemous version of the Our Father. Quote, "Our Father, which art in Petersburg, cursed be your name. May your kingdom crumble, may your will not be fulfilled, yea, not even in hell. Give us our bread which you stole from us, and pay us our debts as we paid yours until now. And don't lead us further into temptation, but don't deliver us from evil, the police of the plebei, and put an end to his cursed government. But as you are weak and poor in spirit, and in power and in authority, down with you for all eternity. Amen." End quote. The ultimate aim of communism in conquering new countries is not to establish another social or economic system, it is to mock God and praise Satan. The German Socialist Student Union has also published a parody of the Lord's Prayer, indicating that the true meaning of the prayer upholds capitalism. Quote, "Our capital, which art in the West, may your investments be sure, may you make a profit, may your shares increase in value, on Wall Street as in Europe. Our daily sale give us today, and extend our credits, as we extend those of our debtors. And do not lead us into bankruptcy, but deliver us from the trade unions, for thine is half the world, and the power, and the riches, for 200 years. Mammon. End quote. The identification of Christianity with the interests of capitalism is outrageous. The true church knows that capitalism, too, is stained with blood, for every economic system bears the marks of sin. Christians oppose communism not from the viewpoint of capitalism, but of the kingdom of God, which is their true social ideal. The above is nothing less than satanic mockery of Jesus' most holy prayer, as is the one published by the Soviets. Mockery of the Lord's Prayer is customary in many communist lands. Ethiopian children are taught to pray as follows. Quote, Our party, which rulest in the Soviet Union, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in Ethiopia and in the whole world. Give us this day our daily bread, and don't forgive the trespasses of the imperialists as we will not forgive them. And may we resist the temptation to abandon the fight, and deliver us from the evils of capitalism. Amen. End quote. Over an Ethiopian Lutheran radio station confiscated by the communist government, a Satanist version of the Bible is broadcast. 1 Corinthians 13 sounds like this, quote, Though I speak all the languages and have no enmity towards the landlords or the capitalists, I have become as sounding brass. Class hatred suffers no exploitation and is brutal. Class hatred envies their riches and vaunts itself with the successful revolutions in many socialist states, and now abide faith, hope, and class hatred, but the greatest of these is revolutionist hatred. End quote. During the general strike organized by the French communists in 1974, workers were called to march in the streets of Paris shouting the slogan, Giscard d'Estaing est foutu, les démons sont dans la rue. Giscard d'Estaing, then French president, is done with. Demons are now in the street. Why not the proletariat, or the people? Why this evocation of satanic forces? What has this to do with the legitimate demands of the working class to have better salaries? Deification of communist leaders. Communist leaders have been and are deified. Listen to the following poem honoring Stalin in Pravda, Moscow, March 10, 1939. Pravda is the central organ of the Communist Party in the USSR. Quote, The sun shines mildly, and who would not know that you are this sun? The pleasant noise of the sea waves sings an ode to Stalin. The blinding snowy peaks of mountains sing the praise of Stalin. The millions of flowers and meadows thank you. Likewise the covered tables, the beehives thank you. The fathers of all young heroes thank you, Stalin. Oh, Lenin's heir, you are for us, Lenin himself. End quote. Thousands of such poems have been composed. Here is another hymn to Stalin of extraordinary fervour and beauty, reminding one of Eastern Byzantine Christianity in the 4th and following centuries. Quote, O great Stalin, O leader of the peoples, thou who broughtest man to birth, thou who purifiest the earth, thou who restorest the centuries, thou who makes bloom the spring, thou who makes vibrate the musical chords, thou splendour of my spring, O thou sun reflected from millions of hearts. End quote. The foregoing hymn was published in Pravda in August 1936. In May 1935, the same official party newspaper had published the following extraordinary effusion. Quote, He commands the sun of the enemies to set. He spoke, and the east for friends became a great glow. Should he say that coal turns white, it will be as Stalin wills. The master of the entire world, remember, is now Stalin. End quote. A much later composition by a leading Soviet poet shows development in style but hardly in subject matter. Quote, I would have compared him to a white mountain, but the mountain has a summit. I would have compared him to the depths of the sea, but the sea has a bottom. I would have compared him to the shining moon, but the moon shines at midnight, not at noon. I would have compared him to the brilliant sun, but the sun radiates at noon, not at midnight. End quote. Mao Zedong has been hailed as the one whose mind created the world. Kim Il-sung, dictator of North Korea, is also deified, as is Nicolae Ceausescu, communist dictator of Romania. Ceausescu is another Stalinist figure. He is the object of a personality cult and is likened to Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Pericles, Cromwell, Napoleon, Peter the Great, and Abraham. This distinguished roster, it seems, is not enough, so he is also called our lay god. By the way, communist Romania, which does not allow international religious conventions, permitted a witches' convention in the spring of 1979 in Curtea de Argeș. In Bucharest, there is a museum containing gifts brought by the people to Ceausescu. In it is a watercolour painted by a blind man who regained his sight through a miracle. He attributes it to the fact that he concentrated all his thoughts on the president, who not only can make the blind to see, but can move the Carpathian mountains. Another portrayal shows Ceausescu with King Vlad Tepes, who was known as the Vampire Dracula, because he used to impale his adversaries. In similar fashion, Stalin magnified the personality of Tsar Ivan the Terrible.